Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Esther Kustanowitz. Esther is a writer, editor, and consultant. She's a contributing writer at the Los Angeles Jewish Journal and a columnist at J, the Jewish Weekly of Northern California. She was founding editor and contributor at groknation.com and has written for Modern Loss, Haaretz, I messed that up, JTA, The Jewish Week, The Forward, and E-Jewish Philanthropy. Welcome, Esther.
Thanks, Peter. It's great to be here.
I needed a lot of coaching on this, and I still messed it up.
It's okay. Hebrew's hard.
Yes, indeed. And I can only do English.
Mm-hmm.
So
I thought this whole interview was supposed to be in Hebrew. No? You'd been studying with someone, and no, that was someone else. Okay.
Yes, that's your next podcast. Let's just get into it, Esther. If you weren't working as a writer, editor, or consultant, what would you be doing? And I know you're prepped for this because you were listening to a podcast on the way over here.
Yes, I studied. I'm a very good student. I don't ever remember everything I've studied, but I do the preparation. So yeah, I think that when I was growing up, the answer would have been an actor. Like I really was thinking it would be actor or writer. And then I felt like acting had way too much rejection. Not that writing has none, but it's a little bit like more cowardly rejection. Like you get a letter in the mail instead of somebody telling you face to face that you're wrong for a part or something like that. But I think realistically, like if my writing powers were taken away from me and I couldn't form sentences anymore, I think I would probably end up doing something in like the listening social sciences. So like social worker or kind of creative enabler, listening to people and trying to help them translate their ideas into action.
You'd be a muse.
Oh, yes. I'm a professional muse.
And the world needs more muses.
That's right. And hopefully I'll be an amusing muse, amusingmuse.com, which I haven't bought yet, but maybe I should.
You'll have about maybe a 2-week lead time before this, this drops.
I can get on that then.
Do you think amusingmuse.com is already purchased?
Probably. I would assume so. I mean, if not, somebody fell asleep on the job because I feel like that's not the most brilliant thing that's ever been said before. So,
okay. So if you couldn't be a writer, you still wouldn't do acting, so it wouldn't even fall back on your first thing, you would become a listener.
Yeah, I think a listener of sorts.
You could become an interviewer.
I could, but then I wouldn't be able to write things down. I would have to deal with audio, which is great. I love podcasting. I've just become aware of it and, a little bit late to the party on it for sure. But I'm hopefully going to be starting my own podcast at the Jewish Journal. So it'll be an entertainment related podcast. So that'll be super fun. We recorded like a kind of a chemistry episode with me and my co-host. I called it a chemistry test, and I think it's going to really work well. So
that's fine.
I'm excited for it.
So let's just pretend you're going to become a podcaster instead of a writer.
Okay.
And so a talker and a listener rather than a writer. So it's interesting. I mean, I'm not the kind of writer that you're a writer. Like you write a lot and I write painfully, but it's been really interesting doing a podcast because it's a different skill set.
Right.
And it's one even that's different than like, for instance, like the talks that I give or the teaching that I do, which does involve listening, but not to the same degree, right? Podcasting is actually more like improv. You actually made a crack about we're improvising when we were setting up. It's much more like improv than it is like lecturing or giving a talk in a sense. Because almost none of this is scripted, with the exception of my first question and my last question. Do you remember what my last question will be?
No.
Good. So tell me about this podcast. So you did a chemistry test and it went well.
Yeah, it's going to be with a coworker of mine from the Journal, and the two of us are fierce enjoyers and consumers of popular culture, and also pretty analytical when it comes to trying to figure out where it fits in a Jewish context. One of the things that I have been talking about extensively in anywhere where it'll give me a forum to do so is the increase in Jewish-related content that's on television, largely due to the fact that television's definition has expanded in ways that no one ever saw coming. And so now there's this endless ability to create content and to put it out there. And even if it's a little bit more niche, so that's part of the thing, but also that people who were working in Hollywood as writers and had previously, in previous generations, kind of suppressed their Jewish identities are now allowing it to inform the stuff that they're writing. So we're seeing a lot more kind of inside Jewish jokes. Sometimes it is Jewish for the jokes, as that episode of Seinfeld said, but sometimes it adds depth to a character or to a plot. So it's been really interesting to track that. And so that'll be part of what we'll cover at the podcast, but we'll also try to cover things that are happening in the world that week, not from a political perspective, but for instance, in June, it was Anne Frank's birthday. I don't know if you sent her a card, but anyway, so there was a lot of stories about Anne Frank, and again, making jokes about Anne Frank, who can do that and why, and what was the nature of the joke. And there were a lot of people who felt that there were a number of cultural products that were misappropriating and
what example?
So,
for example,
there's a Netflix series called Historical Roasts that is run by Jeffrey Ross.
Oh yes, I'm familiar.
I'm sure you are.
Well, we've had I had Julie Seaball on recently, who has written a book about roast battles, and you can't talk about roast battles without talking about Jeffrey Ross.
Absolutely. And so one of his targets in this historical roast battles, where he roasts historical figures, it's meant to be good fun, but he did an interview with the Journal in which my co-host Aaron Ben Moshe actually was the person who interviewed him, and he talked about how he was really doing it because he felt like the next generation had no basis in history, they just did not know history. And so this was a way to kind of get them interested in historical figures, to kind of say, is that really true? And then go to the internet and look it up and actually learn more. So one of those figures is Anne Frank. Okay. And so what do you mean you're roasting Anne Frank? Even the words.
Boy, that's a big punching down moment, no?
It can be. Yeah. Or, in the theory of it, it could be. I think that the way they handled it was really well done. That most of the punching bag kind of humor was aimed at Hitler, was aimed at FDR.
Yes.
So it wasn't, there were a couple of jokes that kind of were a little bit too far. And, you talked about Julie and her, her Julie Seaball.
Yes.
And her film Too Soon, talking about 9/11. But, in the Jewish community, the ultimate too soon is the Holocaust. And that was actually not as recent as 9/11, but for some reason is still a very taboo topic in a lot of circles when it comes to humor. Or, it depends on who's doing the humor. But in terms of Jeff Ross's stuff, if you don't like roasts and that kind of making fun of somebody kind of comedy, you're definitely not going to like a roast of Anne Frank. So it's
yes.
You don't like him saying mean things about Donald Trump, you're not going to like him saying mean things about Anne Frank. That's for sure.
Yes. It's not, I think that's a style of comedy it's just not for everyone, but the people who like it love it.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's fast. So you have a term for this, the idea that describes, as you say, the increasingly common event of Jewish references in storylines entering otherwise non-Jewishly themed TV. Mm-hmm. And you call that?
TV gone Jewy.
TV gone Jewy.
Yes.
So this is going to be a big theme in your podcast.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, it's my thing, so I'll probably talk about it more than Aaron will. Mm-hmm. But it's the kind of thing that I've been really interested in, primarily because it's an issue of representation that I felt was very lacking when I was growing up. I never saw a Jewish woman with brown hair, observing anything Jewish, in a TV show ever. The only time you ever found out somebody was Jewish was in opposition to Christmas. You had to wait for the Christmas episode where they would wish everyone a Merry Christmas and then be like, but a Happy Hanukkah to Dr. Goldstein.
Yeah.
And it would just be like, oh, he is Dr. Goldstein. There's a reason he's Jewish. Okay, that's great. Thanks, General Hospital. So, but there was never anybody talking about Judaism or Jewish content or identity or tradition or customs or holidays in any kind of like deeper way.
Yes,
and now there's a lot more of that. Even the more obscure things in Jewish tradition are having their day on TV, often in an occult kind of context. So you'll see some Hebrew popping up on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., or you'll see like Sleepy Hollow and Grimm, both of which dealt with the occult and supernatural. There was almost always a Hebrew text lurking somewhere.
Okay.
Or, somebody was talking about a golem, a monster that's made to protect a village that originated from a Jewish myth. You'd sometimes hear about a Dybbuk, like a Yiddish demon, all of those things. And more recently on Arrow, there was an episode where they were looking to find people. They didn't know where they were, but they had like this computer code that was indicating where they were, but they couldn't translate it and they couldn't figure out how to do it. And then somebody looks at it and says, it's gematria. And so then somebody goes, what? What's gematria? And he says, it's Jewish numerology, where each Hebrew numerology, where each one of the Hebrew letters is assigned a numerical value. And then somebody goes, oh, of course, I should have seen it. So it's just like one of those things that I had to kind of like shake my ear to figure out if I had actually heard them say gematria in the middle of this superhero narrative, which does not otherwise really touch on Judaism, except, as I mentioned before, Hanukkah,
Yes.
kind of Christmas opposition.
I'm not paying attention to this stuff.
Uh-huh.
And I guess so when you think about television, right? So there was, a sort of in the 70s and 80s, a rise in television, especially comedy featuring Black Americans,
Mm-hmm.
right? From it's moving on up to a deluxe apartment in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
What's
Is
that?
that the Jeffersons?
The Jeffersons, there's a bunch of obviously Cosby and beyond, you know what I mean? And that continues today. And so you're saying that not only are there kind of, you're finding this sort of dripping, showing up in different places, but then there's like full on, right? Mm-hmm. So is it the Goldbergs?
Yes, in a sense.
Is an example of like a Cosby-like program for, I haven't seen the show, so I don't know.
I've only seen a couple of episodes of the Goldbergs, actually. And then there was a series called The Goldbergs that predated that show.
I see.
Which was a little bit more about the immigrant experience, kind of Lower East Side Goldbergs. So I call them the Oldbergs and the Goldbergs, but I don't think that's going to catch on anywhere. And so I think that, I love the way that you talked about it as kind of dripping in, it's kind of like seeping from the writer's experience into the writer's room and then onto the page and then to the actual final product. But I think that you're seeing Jewish characters that are much more fully formed in terms of their Jewish identity, even if they're not religious.
Okay.
So
who would those be? Give me some examples.
So one of the examples is Rebecca Bunch, who is Rachel Bloom's alter ego on Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. She's absolutely a Jewish character. There's a bar mitzvah episode. There are a couple of songs that focus kind of on Jewish tendencies. For instance, there's a song called Remember That We Suffered, where they're at a bar mitzvah, they're dancing around happily in a hora as a Jewish dance, and then they're singing, being happy, and so here we are singing and being happy, but we'll do it in a minor key to remember that we suffered.
I see.
So it's like there's that kind of like playing with it. Our tendency is that if some people don't know Jews, they may not know that that is a thing that happens. But that also makes sense because it perfectly reflects the experience of being a funny person in a Jewish context, is that it's simultaneously the easiest thing to do and the hardest thing to do because there's so much to play with, and being funny and humor has been part of the Jewish experience for centuries, partially because of being a minority and having, kind of, this is one of the tools that they can't take away from you, essentially.
Indeed.
But also it's also challenging for the reasons I described before, because everybody has their own kind of line that you're obviously going to cross with your comedy, because, you don't know what their line is until you cross it, and they're like, that's too far, that's too soon, how dare you, you're a disgrace to the Jewish people. Like, it escalates very quickly.
Yeah, well, certainly I think, when you think about Jewish culture, it's so diverse. And so, so it's diverse religiously, right? So there are people who, who identify as Jewish but are not, are sort of, I don't know the right way to say it, but culturally so. And then other folks all the way out to very Orthodox. And so the moment you try to tackle this subject, it sounds to me like you're bound to bounce up against one side or the other, and then even just like ethnically, the breadth of the culture, in that kind of sense. So I could see how there's opportunity, but a lot of risk. Right.
And there's also, I think that as I've talked about the streaming platform kind of expanding, but the definition of who is a Jew is also expanding. It used to be that there were very, very few Jews of color. Now there are many more Jews of color. When you used to say the Jewish experience on film, it was almost always Ashkenazi, meaning Eastern European. But there are people who come from Sephardi countries, like kind of Spain and France, and have different kinds of customs and different kind of touch points, and also different kind of humor points. So if you talk about like some of the tropes that I feel like I even want to quiz you, like when you think of Jewish on screen, like what do you think about?
The big one is, is the sort of stereotypical kind of Jewish American princess, stereotype. Like
right.
That's the one that that comes to mind.
Yeah, and Rachel Bloom did a great song called "The Jap Battle Rap," which I don't know if you've seen it, but kind of like
no.
It's a must see. It's actually co-written by a friend of mine, Zach Sherwin, who's just a tremendous talent and has like great verbiage that he can intersperse, and is a terrific rapper. I highly recommend his work. I will send you lots of links and until you invite him on your show. But anyway, so like he and Rachel and her regular co-writer, I'm sorry, Jack Dolgen, I think is his name, but they created this masterpiece where they talk with two Jewish lawyer women, two Jewish women who are lawyers, like battling each other to see who's best.
I see.
And so like there's a lot of layered Jewish references in there saying, that their mothers pitted them against each other because they were egged on like Seder plates. And a Seder plate is a ritual object used during the Seder, which is a Passover meal, and one of the objects is an egg. So it's like if you don't know any of that stuff, you're like, I don't understand what that means, but you're carried through it by the talent that's involved in it and the actual integrity of it musically. But, I think it's just, they talk about like the Jewish American princess and what that means. And then as the series ended, they did a reprise of that song, the Jap battle rap, but it was kind of like the Jap flattery rap or something like that. And where they said nice things about each other, but still kind of in that framework of a rap battle. And they specifically called out the Jewish American princess and said that it used to be a slur and now they're trying to reclaim it in a different way. But again, since I did not identify as a Jewish American princess, like if that was the only representation on screen, that was negative for me because that's what people expected a Jewish person, a Jewish woman to be, and that's not what I was. But I'm just thinking about the other kinds of things we're talking about, like chicken soup to cure a cold, and like the Jewish mother who's like overbearing.
Yes, that would be the second one that I was going to come up with. Yeah.
So like not all of those things are Ashkenormative, as we've started to say around the office, but like kind of favoring the Ashkenazi Eastern European Jewish experience and excluding people whose experience that wasn't. Jews by choice, people who convert to Judaism, like they don't have that in their background. And they might, after they convert, become, want to be part of the jokes, like I said, the Jewish for the jokes, Jerry Seinfeld, the Seinfeld episode, if you know that one.
I'm going to put that in the exhibits also.
Yeah.
The other, obviously, a lot of these things play on stereotypes, especially if it's being interspersed and being used for comedic effect,
right.
In a hacky kind of way, I think. It oftentimes is. The other one is like the Jewish lawyer, right? The stereotypical Jewish lawyer the joke about, about the ethnicity of your lawyer and indicating how good that person is as a result of it.
Right.
These are just ones that are coming to mind, but
yeah, I mean, it's interesting to hear it because I spend so much time like immersed in the Jewish community that some of those things are, less part of what we'll identify as like a trope or a negative kind of thing. But the Jewish lawyer, Jewish Jews who are good with money. That's
Yes, of
another
course, the
one. It's
banker,
like, be like, I am certainly not a Jew who's good with money. So I don't know if that's a stereotype that's in our DNA somewhere. It skipped a generation, or actually skipped a whole family tree. But I think that the line between making fun of a tendency and having it become a stereotype that's used in negative context is also like, it's a fine line, and it depends on where you're standing. So like, you'll have people who will say that it's similar to the Anne Frank thing, is that like when I talk about the Jap battle rap, people are like, I don't like the word Jap. I would never watch anything that has the word Jap because I'm against it. And then somebody will pipe in and say, it's also a pejorative about Japanese people. And then it'll be like, yeah, but the context is like the pejorative is solely Jewish here. But like you're arguing over who it's insulting more, which is actually, I would argue, a very Jewish thing to do, is to argue over who's more insulted or who's less insulted. And I think that, saying something like that gets me in trouble with some people. And some people will be like, that's totally on the money. That's really it. But with Anne Frank also, like the Jeffrey Ross roast, like I was talking about before, like people didn't need to see it to know that they hated it and it was in terrible taste, which is it's not a process that I endorse. I really think that if you're going to hate something that somebody's created, you at least owe it to that creator to watch it before you comment about it. But of course, the internet disagrees with me.
Indeed. Yeah. I think, so I'm working on this new project, and one of the ideas in the project is about how good comedy, hell, bad comedy, polarizes. That is that you just can't make everyone happy. And so you just have, as a comic, you just have to pick your audience, and you just want those folks to be happy and laughing, and to do it with as little regard as possible to the folks who aren't happy, especially if those people are kind of knee-jerking, so to speak, and that is that they're not even giving you the benefit of the doubt, in that sense. And so it sounds like you're describing what is a natural extension of comedy in general, which is we live in a world where it's easy to be outraged. It's easy to get access to the things that are outrageous when that used to not be the case. And then it's very easy to communicate about your outrage now. And so that sort of amplifies what has been going on in comedy, since the beginning of comedy, which is one person's laughing at, your fart joke and the other person's disgusted.
Right.
And so, and frankly, like the comics who have achieved great success often have doubled down on their risque behavior. Carlin and Richard Pryor started out as kind of tame comics, and they really didn't come into their own until they started to be provocative. So and then I do like this idea of kind of co-opting language that is a slur.
Yeah.
And then using it in a way, whether it be playful or positive, as a way to sort of rob those words of their power.
Right. Well, it also depends who's doing that reclamation.
Indeed.
Right. So like, I feel like, there's been opportunities in the past where Jews have like taken slurs and reconstituted them. So there was
there's a magazine.
Right. There was a Hebrew magazine for a while.
Right.
And that also for me recalled the famous monologue in Life of Brian, where you've seen Monty Python's Life of Brian, but
a long time ago.
But he talks. Brian has found out that his father is a Roman centurion or something like that, and he's like, no, and he starts saying, I'm a Hebrew, I'm a Heb, a kike, a hook nose, a Hebe, a Red Sea pedestrian, and I'm proud of it. It's a long series of things that he says. Now, I thought it was really funny because it was a proclamation of his Jewish identity, but there are probably people who say, well, he wasn't Jewish, and the people in the troupe weren't Jewish, so they have no right to kind of play with that language. But they're also comedians, so you expect them to be a little bit outrageous.
And they're acting.
Right. And Heat Magazine, when it first came out, was absolutely a magazine for Gen X. There was no expectation that people older than Gen X were going to get it or like it, even that it existed. It was intentionally provocative. And so, it's a question of who is your audience?
my dad, this is a little bit of sidebar, but my dad has a humor blog called Jewish Humor Central.
Okay.
Where he posts videos every day of various Jewish humor related things, always clean stuff. Like he doesn't really kind of go over the edge because his audience is a lot older than my audience, so to speak, if I had an audience. But, you know, he's never going to post anything from the Netflix Jeffrey Ross roast of Anne Frank. Even if it's a funny, incisive bit about Hitler, he's not going to post that because his audience will go insane. Like he speaks a lot to seniors in Florida and things like that. If you know your audience, you know, I'm not going to come to them with like necessarily like whole jab feed, you know, all slurs based comedy because they're just going to turn off their ears immediately. So part of it is knowing your audience. If you care about that, if you are the kind of comic who's just like, I'm me and whoever comes to see me, you know, they better prepare because this is what I'm going to give them, and they may like it, they may not. You know, some people are a lot steelier when it comes to, you know, dealing with audience reactions, and some people don't want to be liked as much as they want to be provocative and have people talking about them.
I think that's fair, although I would argue that comic is more interested in the art than the commerce of the business, which I think is fine. I mean, you know, in the same way that a painter might want to paint stuff that provokes, and another painter wants to paint stuff that sells,
right,
and also provokes. You know, like in that kind of sense. So I want to. This is super fascinating to me.
Good.
We're actually. You're from New Jersey.
I am.
Yeah,
Northern.
I'm from New Jersey, also Southern, and we both went to Rutgers.
Yes, that's right.
And, you know, for me, it's been a very interesting experience. So, you know, my hometown was not Jewish at all.
Where are you from?
From Willingboro, New Jersey. So it's...
Never heard of it.
Yeah, so it started out like as a fairly balanced town in terms of white families and black families. And by the end, when I moved away, you know, my high school was over 70 or 80% black, so white flight in full effect kind of thing, which, you know, led me to have actually a really quite diverse childhood in the sense of I was an outsider, I was a minority, and then I went off to Rutgers, which is an incredibly diverse university experience, and, you know, where I obviously got exposed to Jewish peers and so on. And then I became an academic. And I became an academic in the area of behavioral economics, which, you know, the two of the sort of founding fathers are Danny Kahneman and Amos Tversky, right? So not only just Jewish, but Israelis and so on. And so, which is, you know, in the same way that these kind of mentor effects and, you know, happen in comedy and other places, that certainly has happened in academia. And so I find myself having Israeli friends and Jewish friends and so on, and getting a lot more kind of exposure to these ideas and tropes and stereotypes, and sitting at dinner and hearing Holocaust jokes and not knowing, can I laugh or not at these kinds of things.
And there's I mean, jokes that Americans who spend a lot of time in Israel make about the Israeli sense of humor, and you know, when is too soon is like 5 minutes after it happened, and when is not too soon is an hour after it happened. So like, it's, you know, it obviously depends on how close you are to the tragedy, you know, the particular tragedy. But I remember that there was one point I was in Israel, and some Palestinian had driven a truck into a crowd. Like that was like the first time anybody had like used a truck to kind of like inflict terrorism. And you know, I was talking to a friend of mine, and I said, you know, it's really tragic what happened. And she said, yeah, but I already heard 3 jokes about it. And it's because that's part of the way Israelis cope with things, is being a little bit more caustic and reactive in a way that, like, you know, we always have that period in America of, like, you know, after there's a tragedy, we're all like, we regroup by praying,
being solemn,
prayers and solemnity, and Israelis kind of like recover from that a little bit more quickly, at least in the public sphere. You know, obviously tragedy strikes personally, and, you know, it's not something you get over very quickly, but, you know, at least in terms of, it doesn't slow anything down there, really.
Yeah, I spent some time in Israel, and actually for the Humor Code, we went to Palestine to
in some ways to see is the same phenomenon evident on the other side of the wall, anytime you find kind of robust people, which certainly Israelis qualify, you find the potential for jokes in the face of tragedy, even, and especially immediately in that sense. I mean, I've done some research on this idea of too soon, and I haven't looked at it from the coping standpoint. I've looked at it from the passage of time standpoint. So the passage of time helps and then eventually hurts. Right. So at some point you get so far away from it that it's no longer a kind of viable topic that's there. I always go back to my friend Alonzo Bowden's quote. Alonzo's a stand-up, and his perspective is, it's not too soon if it's funny. Right. And so there is this notion of how good is the joke, and I think also this is getting back to your point about the Anne Frank roast, who's the real victim, right? So you make a joke about a topic, and some people you can't joke about that topic, but is it a joke that makes the topic, I should say this, is it a joke that perpetuates something negative, or is it something that tries to do away with, the classic, can't tell jokes about rape, but what if you make jokes about rapists? And so, how is it done, to me, matters a lot more than when is it done. Right. And there's a great film, which, if you haven't seen, you should see it, called The Last Laugh, which is, it's a documentary about the Holocaust in film. The Holocaust in comedy. And it interviews people like Jeffrey Ross and Gilbert Gottfried and Mel Brooks and Sarah Silverman, talking about again, it's there's that issue comes up. It's about the quality of the joke. It's about who you're punching up and not punching down, that kind of thing. Where jokes about Hitler are fine. Jokes about concentration camp inmates maybe not. Unless it's in the context of they're making their life livable by telling a joke. Indeed. So there's a lot of different ways to come at it, and any way you come at the Holocaust, someone's going to tell you that you're a bad person. So it's just kind of preparing that's part of the dance. Yeah, I haven't, from my previous life as an academic, or should I say my earlier life as an academic, I did a lot of work on moral psychology. And actually it was that work that set the stage for the humor research. Actually, the first paper I ever published was about what makes moral violations funny. And that served as the kind of initial test case for the benign violation theory, which I know you came prepared to talk about. I did. And so, spied at my notes. Well, first of all, I'm trying to, I've had 68 or so guests. I'm trying to remember if I've ever had a guest show up with notes about. So I noticed them, obviously, because they're it's unique. Yeah. But I think that there is. So if you live in the world of moral psychology, there's this notion of some things are sacred and some things are secular, and the rules for sacred things are different than the rules for secular things. And some of these things might be ritualistic, but one of those things is about trying to keep the sacred sacred. And so you don't want to mix it with the profane, with the secular in a sense. And comedy is really quite secular, and profane. You know what I mean? So the sense of the idea that there are just some topics that are off limits for some people is just a very easy way to navigate the world. You don't have to wade into the complexities when you just say, nope, you're not allowed to do that, in a sense, which I think obviously comics chafe at, because they're just like, hold on, I'm good at this. Let's see what I can do. Right. Certainly Mel Brooks, I think, is an outstanding example of someone who's certainly not for everyone, but is highly skilled. Right. Yeah, well, let's give him a shot. When you think about Too Soon, and he did the whole musical number about the Inquisition, and it's like if
if Holocaust is too soon, maybe the Inquisition is okay to joke about. Turns out, no.
Yeah.
Like maybe you could go back and say, the wandering in the desert. Is that okay to make fun of? No, not yet. Like it's just like keep going back and back and back and be like, creation? No, not funny.
Right.
It's kind of like it really depends on who you ask and how willing you are to, I think, as a listener and a consumer of comedy, understand both the intention and also the reception. So, like, if you hear a joke that's funny about the Holocaust that you might not make yourself, but you think it's well crafted and it makes you laugh, that can be something that you think about, like, why did that make me laugh? The part of the research that you did, like just trying to figure out why do people laugh at certain things and why do they keep laughing at them, or what do they get to a certain point where it's actually not funny anymore? And sometimes it's the surprise, that somebody would go there. That's the surprise can register as laughter, which can register as funny, but later can kind of mellow out into a discomfort, which is also part of the comedy process, is pointing out things that people aren't comfortable to talk about. So,
yeah, like I like to say that a lot of comedy points out what's wrong with the world, and so that can serve just a purely entertaining purpose, but it could have this additional layer of getting you to recognize something that you thought was normal,
yeah,
and is now seen as wrong. So I want to. Since we talked about your notes, people want to know what's in your notes.
Oh, what's in my notes?
What is it that you wanted to talk about? What were you preparing, Esther?
Well, I just had I did read the first chapter of your book that was available online, so that was
for free.
Some of notes. So I love the idea of hurl and hurt.
Thank you.
So hurl being the humor,
the humor research lab.
And hurt being the people who are part of it.
The humor research team.
Right, the people who get things hurled at them. And I thought that was really, and that started kind of me thinking about acronyms in general. So when I came across the International Society of Humor Studies, which is ISHS, and I started thinking about how to pronounce that, and the best I could come up with is like, if you were drunk and you tried to pronounce ISIS, it would be like ISIS, like that's the kind of what it would be. So, is that funny? And I just talked about ISIS. ISIS isn't funny, but to make fun of the way ISIS sounds, that it sounds like a treat that you would get on a hot summer day, like, is that funny? It's still ISIS, and, so there's still somebody who's going to say you shouldn't make fun of ISIS. ISIS is going to come get you. And then somebody is going to come along and say, it's actually not ISIS anymore, it's just IS. And, it's like, and, that kind of thing can, ruin a funny moment very easily. But
the mansplaining moment.
And I have to say that I sometimes do Esther-splain with an actually, and I have to stop myself, because when somebody gets something wrong, it's a very natural instinct to be the know-it-all who corrects them. But that seldom wins you friendship points or invites back to parties. So I do tone it down unless somebody is very wrong. I did have a conversation with somebody where they insisted that red velvet cupcakes were made of red chocolate, and I said that was not a thing, and he insisted that it was. And I said, do you want to go to the internet to see who's right? And he goes, I don't need the internet to tell me that I'm right. And I was like, you don't, because it'll tell you that you're wrong. So of course you don't want to go to the internet.
Yeah, so so there was no Bumble date after that.
No. Never.
So yeah, I'm curious.
Oh, some other things?
This is your chance.
So I just thought that, you talked about a little bit in the chapter about incongruity, as Pascal articulated it, or actually your co-author wrote the chapter, because you were a character in the chapter.
I was involved in editing the chapter, but
so you are familiar with the content of the chapter for sure. But he talked about like the incongruity of that's where humor comes from, is like,
Well, yeah, I would say that's what most people think.
Right.
It comes from.
And I was just, I thought that, the breakdown into like violation plus, normal, what's normal, and those kinds of concepts, which I'm not explaining very well now, and you obviously explain much better. But I love, for me, when I think about what makes me laugh, I think about things that are both expected and unexpected. So, like when when I watch a traditional sitcom, I'm often able to predict the punchlines. And so, like, when they go to the place that I got to, I'm proud of myself for getting to the same place as the regular, as the comedy writers, the professionals who are doing it, you know, for many, many years. But it doesn't actually surprise me. It doesn't make me laugh. It makes me kind of like...
Pleases you.
Yeah, it pleases me, and I feel seen, or I feel like I've seen them, and we're like compadres or something like that, even though we've never met and probably will never meet. And really what I'm responding to is the predictability of it. But what I am actually like laughing out loud, you know, everybody LOLs all over the place in their text messages now, but I will never really use that unless I actually am laughing out loud, which is a rarer occurrence than me just saying, ha. You know?
I do a lot of ha-has.
Right, ha-has.
Is a that's funny, but LOL I say for actually laughing out loud.
But
too.
I think most people don't. Like they use it, you know, you're like, oh, I have to go to the store after work, LOL. Be like, why? Did something funny happen there? And be like, no, it just meant I couldn't go home on time. And be like, that's not funny. Why are you LOLing? Oh, I'm just saying ha-ha. I'm like, no, you're saying LOL that you laughed out loud. Why are you laughing out loud? And then people stop calling me.
Yeah. Another friendship bites the dust.
Right. That's really what this is. It's like a chronicle of the friendships I've lost by trying to be funnier, or like trying to correct someone, or maintain a
line in the sand.
A line in the sand, a purity of language that if you're laughing out loud, you should actually be laughing out loud. And then people are like, you take this way too seriously.
So, Esther, I want to make, if I may, a couple comments and observations. So, one is, it's very clear to me that you have comedy chops. For like, you write about a lot of heavy stuff. We'll get to that in a moment. But, you know, you're on this podcast for a reason, which is I met you 2 years ago at it was Thanksgiving? I think it was a Thanksgiving party in LA or something like that.
It was a comedy workshop that you were giving. Like you were leading like 5 of us through comedy writing. I remember there was...
I was?
Yeah, or like you were presenting something and talking about different types of comedy. Yeah, I mean, it was like at Shira's house.
Yes.
And yeah, there was a bunch of us there, and we all got little notebooks with the mustaches on them.
Oh wow! I forgot about. I just remember the meal.
Yeah,
that's really funny.
So yeah, I don't know.
I did do that. I do remember that now. But we well, in any case, we met met at that event, and obviously I encoded that you were funny.
Okay.
And then we've been connected.
Well,
via,
I always said you were smart, so there we go.
I'll take it. You know, so to me, it's like clear you have comedy chops because even just listening to you talk through the way you're thinking about acronyms and you're turning it into jokes and so on, like, you know, kind of in a sort of natural, quick-witted kind of way. And then obviously predicting punchlines, like that's something, I can't say that I'm good at it, except I sometimes start to do it when you start to figure out like I was watching Anthony Jeselnik, his most recent Netflix special, and once you kind of understand his style, if you start to deliberate, you can, you know, I did it a couple times and was quite proud of myself, you know, it took me about 2/3 of watching the first 2/3 of the special to get to that point. What I think is interesting about the pleasure that you get from that, so actually I have a scientific answer for the pleasure that you get from that.
Great.
So,
I've been waiting for a diagnosis, so here it comes.
So very, very clearly that isn't amusement, as you've identified. It's not, or correctly identified as it not being amusement. So the benign violation theory has some things in common with incongruity theory. That is that benign violations often are unexpected. They're often surprising. They're often create some conflict, right? Some, you know, in which I think people see as incongruity. The problem being, of course, that there are many incongruous things that are very clearly not funny, right? And so the idea that you need both something wrong and okay, and that those two things have to be happening in close proximity to each other, often looks like it often is an incongruity, but doesn't have to be. What I think your experience is actually what So I say the benign violation theory is a ha-ha theory, but it's not an aha theory. That is, that many jokes, many comedic things produce a moment of insight. Ah, I see it, I get it kind of experience. But moments of insight are not limited to comedy, right? They happen when you're solving a puzzle, so scientific insights, solving math problems, doing Sudoku, coming up with an answer to a crossword puzzle, all have this moment of insight that has this sort of lightning-like experience, this sort of surprising experience associated with it, and it's pleasurable, right? It's pleasurable to solve a problem, and it's especially pleasurable when it happens like a bolt of lightning. And so when you're predicting punchlines, those are bolts of lightning because they're happening so fast. And so, no, you're not laughing, but you're enjoying yourself, I guess, unless the joke's so hacky that you know.
Right, I mean, that's the other side of
it.
Is that it could be just they're terrible jokes and anyone could predict them. But, I like to believe that it's because I have some deep comedy insight and I'm able to predict, kind of where sentences go.
You have language skills.
Yes.
That's super clear to me.
Yeah.
As an aside, if I could make a plug, if you listen to one other episode of I'm Not Joking, I think you might like the episode with Summer Browning.
Okay.
So Summer's a poet and comic, and she talks really eloquently about the need to stretch language, like that she sees, and these are my words, not hers. She sees language as sort of this living organism, almost like a muscle, that if you exercise it, it grows stronger, in a sense. And so, her belief is that we need to work hard to use words in new ways because it contributes, to this entity, and the richer and stronger and the more diverse this entity is, the more useful it is. And obviously, we live in a world where too often it's not being stretched, in a sense. So, you strike me as someone who's stretching language.
Thank you. I mean, I think that one of the, you talked about my comedy chops, and I think I always kind of had them just starting growing up. My family.
Your dad values it.
Yeah. So comedy is just always a part of it. Often the old Jewish comedy, Mel Brooks, Rob Reiner, Carl Reiner, the 2,000-year-old man. And then kind of, generationally moving on to Rob Reiner, because comedy does run in the family sometimes. And my dad also always wrote, these parodies, these song parodies that were very Jewy, but, they were parodies of regular songs. So there was, a song parody of Piano Man called Chazan Man. Chazan is a Jewish panther in the synagogue. So, it was similar, somebody who's performing for people and he's unappreciated and kind of thing. So it was the same kind of thing, but it was always kind of funny. And so we did that, we sang those things growing up, and it was just, and I always say that in terms of blogging, I started blogging before my father did. So I always say that the tree didn't fall far from the apple, but when it comes to the comedy, it's actually the other way around. It's the apple didn't fall far from the tree. So I think also, I also have self-described as a level 1 improv expert, because I was taking level 1 numerous times at different schools.
Okay.
And I enjoy improv so much more than stand-up because I feel like it's more, it's more conversational. I feel like there's more team building. I feel like it's not one person versus the audience. It's kind of just you get a chance to really live with somebody and find out how their brain works, or, build something with them. I'm really much better, in a studio with somebody, talking back and forth than I would be if I just started talking myself. And I know this from my various attempts to do Facebook Live, where it's just me, and I can be anyway. But when you're actively engaged with somebody who is there for the same reasons you are, not for fame, glory, and the punchline, but to actually build something real that people can relate to and laugh at the realness as opposed to like a clever one-liner. Like that's really much more appealing to me, both in terms of like performing and in terms of watching as well. Of course, bad improv is really hard to watch, but when you get bad improv, it's often because people aren't working with each other; they're kind of working independently on the same stage. So
they're not adhering to the sort of rules of improv. So I actually share. I've said almost exactly the same thing that you just said about improv. I prefer it because I'm a lot more present. So when I watch stand-up, I'm busy deconstructing it as a humor researcher, and I like the camaraderie of improv, and I like the spontaneity of it all. I would make a case for you to try 201 for UCB,
okay.
and I'll tell you why, because I think it will satisfy an additional part of your persona, which is the analytical part. So in 101, this is for the listener, not for you because you've taken it, but at Upright Citizens Brigade, that's my improv training center of choice, but they're all very good. They're giving you the basics of how to create a scene, right? So this notion of yes and listening and, and so on, and then obviously practicing this stuff a lot. Letting go, obviously not worrying, trusting, learning how to gift, like the idea that we're all supporting actors, etc. 201 is designed to start to create jokes, not jokes, to start to create comedy. You're not supposed to tell jokes in improv. And so the 201 version of this is that the things that are often funny in improv is what they call the unusual thing and its justification. So they call this game. So you identify the game of the scene, which is the justification of the unusual thing. And if you, your partner, and all the other members of the group who are working through scenes, often as part of a Harold, a long-form improv show, if everybody gets the game, recognizes it, then they can reproduce game in different ways. And so then it provides like a backbone across themes, and it creates a lot of comedy. And so my suspicion is, A, you're going to be good at identifying game, and then B, you'll be good at creating game in other ways, because that's where the smarts of improv, I think, happen, versus just the sociability of it. I mean, the best improvisers are obviously sociable people, but then they also are equally smart as the sort of stand-ups of the world. Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the people that we identify as like good at improv have been playing with the same people for a long time. So I had an opportunity to attend a live taping of ASCAT, which is kind of the UCB signature show.
Yeah, the founders are members of ASCAT.
Right. Yeah. So like I attended that in New York. They send it for Bravo. It's available if you look on YouTube for it.
And this is ASCAT.
Yeah, it's like there's more than 2 and maybe fewer than 5 episodes, something like that. Like I attended a live taping where it was Tina Fey and Amy Poehler, Horatio Sands, and I'm calling Andy Victor. It's just like these people who have known each other for like a really long time, and also Matt Besser and Matt Walsh and
I've had Matt Walsh on the pod.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So go back and look for that.
It's fun.
But they're the people who like basically they birthed it. They have worked together for many years. They know, like, by looking at each other, what they're going to do. There's, like, that group mind that one of my improv teachers talked about, where you don't have to really, you're communicating with each other without telling that person what you're going to be doing next. And I think that's really kind of just magical. But I think that's rare. You see it on Who's on Again Anyway with Ryan Stiles and Kyle Macri and, like, a couple other people who have like really worked together for years, are familiar with the format, they know the format backwards and forwards, and have had so many chances to game with each other, to find a game with each other, that it looks like a well-oiled machine, and you leave there thinking, oh, that seems like it's easy to use, right? But, I mean, we all have people in our lives who we can work with and who can read us and know, like, how we're going to build the conversation. And that's always the way I thrive in a social environment also, is with people. I don't need to give a center of attention, and that's also, I think, a different kind of person goes into improv and goes into stand-up. So, I mean, a lot of my friends who are stand-up comics, like, they just need to be, they're the show, and, like, you're the audience. And some people do manage to bridge that and engage in the audience in a non-heckling kind of context, and there's more of a dialogue. But I found a lot of stand-ups just really want to be the center of attention.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, I think it's a wonderful art form. It's just, again, I gravitate to the improv stuff, and I keep podcast episode dropping. I'm going to drop a couple more. So I had Billy Merritt on. So Billy's a longtime UCB instructor. In a forthcoming episode after yours launches, I'm having Will Hines, also an instructor and improviser. They're both on a house team here in Los Angeles called The Smokes. Mm-hmm. And they have recently published a book called Pirate Robot Ninja that is the taxonomy of improvisers. And which I think is sort of it's a fun idea, and I think it touches on some of the things that you were talking about. Sort of, the pirate is a little bit of the look at me brass, person who does something spectacular on stage, while the robot is a little bit more listening, paying attention, playing the supporting role. And their argument is that the ultimate improviser can do both, and that's the ninja, so to speak. But I really do like this idea of we're all supporting actors. And I think that the best improvisers really embrace that idea, is that if we all take on that role, we create something really special where everybody has a chance to sort of stand out, but it comes from someone else.
Well, also in life and community building, like that's the idea of the feeling, and that goes back to Idea's concept, which I always have to arc back to because, hi, I'm me. But the idea that we're all responsible for each other, and this is something that I've done, and I've taught some improv workshops that are very basic improv rules in the context of short-form games, that also juxtaposed with principles of Jewish community building. Like we are all responsible for each other, or you shouldn't take yourself outside of the community. That you should feel that you're always a part of it, and you don't rely on a miracle. You do everything you can to give everything you can to a scene so that it goes. You don't just wait for somebody to rescue you. These are all things that are part of community building. I think if we all viewed ourselves literally the leaders or the followers, if you want to be broad strokes about it, but like depending on whatever your community is, whether it's an office environment or if it's a youth group or a social group, like the idea that everybody's an equal part of the group is not always assumed, or it's not always the operating point for a lot of people. But the idea that there's no leader of the group, that like you're just part of the group and everybody's bringing their own stuff, their own brains to the group. And so like it's also about the improv has also taught me like if you have an idea for something and you're working in a group context, like it's fine to have an idea, but you also have to be open to other people's ideas. And if the idea that emerges that is better is not yours, you have to let go of your ego and like just go along with it. So that's
so I referenced this project that I'm working on earlier. So I've talked about it on the podcast before, so it's not a secret. But I'm wondering what your reaction to the title of it is going to be, because I think Esther's making she's squinting her eyes at me.
I'm indicating anticipation without trying to interrupt the flow of the conversation, but you won't say it, so just say it.
So it's called Stick to Business.
Yes.
So I thought that, given your background, you would either love or hate that idea.
I love that you used it. I don't know if I'd love it if I used it. See, that's the other thing.
Why is that?
Because, stick is like, it's comedy, but it's also kind of like, I feel like, going through this with my co-host now, because we're trying to name our podcast, and we can't do it. Like, we're having such trouble. We'll eventually get to it, but we've gone back and forth about including Yiddish, not including Yiddish, including something like thinking it's really about Jewish community, but it's granular and people aren't going to get. And we want to be accessible to everybody, and we don't want to be the word I used before, normative. Like, so we want to, so it's like, we want to be inclusive, but yet specific, and that's been really hard. And so there's thinking about like using Yiddish that like not everybody knows what it is. I mean, in a stick to business, people will be like, oh, it sounds like stick, but it's stick, and it's a comedy book. I guess I better read it and find out what it means. Right? So that works for that context. But,
yeah, and so I'm working very hard at the subtitle of it. I'm not going to give that up yet because it's not settled, but the idea of the book is translating the practices and perspectives of the world's funniest people into actionable business lessons. So, what can we learn about innovation? What can we learn about team building? What can we learn about professional development from these people who have this incredibly challenging job? And so, obviously, it's impossible to do that without thinking about improv and the kind of topics that we're talking about, right? So, most of life is improvisational, and most things that you want to make in life, you need other people. And so, now, the moment you need other people, you need to get along with those people. You need to listen to those people. You need to support those people. You need to be able to give them feedback, and so on. And so, like, that chapter is going to be really focused on these kinds of things. Like, think about something as simple as this. You're a boss. You have a problem that you need to solve. You call a meeting of your top people. Well, very clearly, what we know from the behavioral sciences is that you need people in that room who don't think like you. Because the likelihood of solving the problem goes up with new perspectives. So you have to embrace diversity. And then you also need to then develop inclusiveness. That is that the lowest ranking person feels just as comfortable contributing as the highest ranking person, in part because they know they're not going to be hurt for saying something contrary, but also that they know that they're going to be heard. Well, why would I even bother with it? Well, certainly, like, the worst thing you can do as a boss is say, okay, we have this problem, here's how I'd like to solve it, but I want to get your feedback. Like, you're not going to get anything versus, we have this problem, what do you think I should do? And then at the end you say, I've been thinking about doing this. Right? But, even that simple change of just where do you put your hypothesis matters.
And I think that one of the challenges is that the leader has to really want that feedback.
Indeed.
So that's, a lot of organizations I've been involved with where a leader will come into the room and say, I want your feedback on this problem. And then the answer is, yeah, I decided before I walked in here that I'm going to do it this way. I was hoping one of you would have a better idea, but you don't, so I'm going to go ahead with you. And it was like every level of insulting and a time waster that, I think it's part of also like any kind of leadership environment is helping people around you know that they're valued. Not just like not just saying, I value you, but actually like walking the talk.
Yes. And improv, I believe, like, is a nice, what essentially, like, it's not that improv has this magical formula, it's just what improvisers have realized that they have a very difficult job, which is to create a scene out of nothing, and then to make that scene comedic, if indeed that's the goal of that particular show. And in order to do that, you need ground rules, and that if everybody in the group can embrace those ground rules, make them automatic, then suddenly the likelihood of solving this problem goes up. And it just so happens that a lot of life has that similar thing, which is we need to create a solution, and there are often many solutions, and it's often going to be messy, kind of doing it. So I want to cover a couple other things before we wrap, but it's fun talking to you about this because I'm working on this project right now. This stuff is top of mind, and I'm doing tons of reading and writing about it, and it's fun to talk to someone who is thinking in the same kind of way. You also do work on loss and grieving and so on. I know this is a heavy topic and probably not the best topic to end on, but I don't know much about your work in this area, and I want you to tell me a little bit about it.
Sure. So I've always said that, like, I feel like I have, those tragedy and comedy masks of old, the image of theater, like in the kind of the Greek sense, the crying and the laughing, that I have them kind of like floating over my head, and I pull on them as necessary, kind of like one or the other, sometimes both. And I think that, part of life is dealing with loss, which I always knew, obviously, because I'm a human being who has been aware of mortality since early years. But my mother passed away in 2011, and when that happened, I was one of the first people in my faithful group to lost a parent. And as a writer, as somebody who's always dealt with the tumultuousness of my emotions by writing about it, I wrote about it actually. I started writing about her when she was in the hospital, and it wasn't looking good. And I wrote about there were some highs, there were some lows, and I made some observations. Some of them were comedic because I was trying to make myself laugh. I think it's like when we're sad is when we most need like a bolt of humor, even if it's not necessarily like something everybody will laugh at. And I learned that also from my parents. My mom, when one of her parents died, I don't remember which one, there was something that happened, which is so granular, I'm not going to get into it now, but it was something like related to death that made her and like the other people who were in the room like laugh. And it was just, I remember it was just so needed, and she referred to that often, and I knew that was a value for her. So I also feel like having, being able to dwell in this space where, there's things in life that are very sad, and we can get shut down at certain points in after a loss, it does feel like we're getting shut down, and then maybe it feels like that a little less. But there are things that I've learned to kind of laugh at, even as I recognize that they are part of a deep wound. So, for instance, I've been writing about it for a long time. I proclaimed I was writing a book about it very early on. It's however many years later, and I'm still working on the book, but it was titled Nothing Helps But This Might Help, which is kind of like everybody's approaching me like, I know nothing helps, and then they would proceed to kind of like offer something that they thought would help, and I thought that this tension I thought was really funny also, because like if somebody said, I know nothing helps, but I'm here if you need me, like that's really all you need, and you can also offer specific offers of help, so it's like, I know nothing helps, but I am going to cater those after I leave the sugar house. So if you have a specific treat in mind that you'd like, please let me know. I'm happy to pick it up. It's no trouble. So it's no trouble is like the magic word for me, because I don't want anybody to go any trouble for me. But if they're going anyway, and they wouldn't mind, and it's something specific, it's something I can focus on. So, there were things like that I was able to point out that people were like, oh, that's cool to know about. And so, as I went through the experience of the immediacy of loss and also the years since, like I've started thinking about the things that remind me of my mother, that there's other normal things that remind you of somebody who's passed away. Their birthday or like a piece of clothing or whatever. But then there's all the random stuff that you don't realize until you pass it. It's like part of your life. Like I remember when I was walking in my neighborhood once, and I saw a Ziploc bag on the street. And I'd be like, a Ziploc bag. And I was remembering this story about how my mother said it used to always travel with Ziploc bags, because especially if you're on a plane, because if you, the barf bags on airplanes don't always contain it, but if you have a Ziploc bag, you could just zip it up and then put it in your bag and throw it away later. And I just was like, oh my God, has my mother been walking around with like Ziploc bags of vomit in her purse? But it was just like, it's like you're laughing, I'm laughing. A Ziploc bag on the street cannot can mean nothing to anybody, or it can mean everything to somebody. And so like those kinds of things, and like that's a funny story, but it also made me cry. it's like the space between laughter and tears is a very, it's very, it's like a Zen.
I agree with you. Yeah, it's, the things that make us laugh and the things that make us cry are often the same thing, just interpreted in different ways. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. So I lost my mom in 2012 and my dad in 97. And, listening to you talk about the things that remind you of her, for me, it's saying. I catch myself saying something my mom, we grew up pretty, single mom, she was single parent, and money was difficult, and my mom always used to say, beggars can't be choosers. Mm-hmm. I still say that kind of a thing, and it's one of those things that often, I'll even attribute it to my mom. My mom always said, beggars can't be choosers. Mm-hmm. And so it's interesting, that my touch points for her, 7 years after her death, is often, her perspectives coming out of my mouth at times.
Yeah, I've had an annual Mother's Day, kind of remembering our Mother's Day brunch, for people, and you're welcome to come next year if you're around, for people who have lost their mothers and are kind of alone on Mother's Day and feel like assaulted by the, not having plans, and assaulted by the media with its constant, buy your mother flowers, buy your mother, it's relentless. And so, one of the things that we did was we had like a wall of wisdom where people would write down on Post-its the things that their mothers used to say, and then could talk about it with the group or not, depending on how they felt about it. But it was always interesting to see like the range of perspectives that people had. And the one I always put up there is ignore the pettiness of other people, which is something that I've always tried to come back to. She always thought that there are people in the world who are just petty and don't want to succeed, but you should ignore them anyway and just go on with your life. So
I think it's fitting to end with that idea because it relates to what we opened up talking about, which is the notion that you can't make everybody happy. In the world of comedy especially, in that sense. Mm-hmm. Last question. What is it that you're reading, watching, or listening to that really stands out? Like, it's not just good, it's great.
Right. I watch a lot, so I'm going to come back to that once I've had a chance to figure out what the answer to that is. But I'm reading I Like to Watch by Emily Nussbaum, which is, she's a incredible writer who is it's a collection of essays that she wrote for the New Yorker about television.
Okay.
And they range from like Buffy to Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and I'm just finding her analysis to be very salient and interesting. I don't always agree with everything she says, but she's super smart, and she talks she uses words like creepy and things like that I would have to tell other friends that they should look out for, ask me what they mean if they don't understand me. So that's what I'm reading. Watching, I'm watching a lot of different things because I have a TV column, so I'm watching a lot of things. I loved Schitt's Creek. I thought it was incredible. It took me a couple of episodes to get into it, but then I was marveling at the performances in it. Catherine and Eugene Levy and Dan, they're just really good. And it's the kind of comedy that I was starting to say that I can't predict the punchline. They're just people who I can't know how they're going to react, or sometimes just saying the one word, the way Catherine says I love it. It's just the way she says your daughter's name, there's something about it that makes me laugh every single time because it's so pretentious. I think the characters are very, very well drawn. And I'd say also there's a movie coming out on Netflix called Red Sea Diving Resort that stars Chris Evans, who's Captain America, as a Mossad agent who's working to rescue the Ethiopian Jews from Sudan where they're being persecuted in the 80s. So that was a really interesting movie. And in terms of It's the other one, listening. Yeah, I've just started listening to this podcast called I'm Not Joking.
Very funny.
Yeah, I was saying I'm actually just really getting acquainted with the variety of podcasts. It's a very overwhelming space to visit these days. So
The barriers to entry are pretty low, and so there's lots of choices.
yeah, so I've been coming to like pop culture and humor podcasts. So I've been listening to Pop Culture Happy Hour, which is I think an NPR show with 4 people talking about pop culture. So it's probably the closest to what my podcast will be, but with 2 people. It'll probably be some interviews too. So yeah, I'm just trying to get acquainted with it, but it's also really hard just because there's really of them out there and there's no quality control. So I have to rely on my friends to recommend things. But my friends are very, very taste. So like, the True Murder podcast, like they True Murder heads, you know.
People love those, but they don't do anything for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it.
And then there's the ones that are like very celebrity personality driven, which is okay if you like that celebrity, but like you really have to like them a lot in order to listen to other stuff. So, I don't know. I tend to also look at not just the podcast host, but like who they're interviewing. So like, you know, there are a few of them that I will listen to there's very few of them that I listen to every episode.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly I'll go through the list and say, oh, they're talking to this person, I really love to see what that person said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Esther, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you. This was a joy. It's really lovely to come visit you in Hollywood, and welcome to LA. I hope it's treating you really well. There's certainly a lot of comedic big experience to experience here, and I hope you're getting to all of them.
I'm on my way.
Okay. Very good.
Great. Cheers.
Well, thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit judymcgraw.org for more information about our guests, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Judy McGraw next week for another fun, fascinating conversation on I'm Not Joking.